Hi, and welcome to the New York Now podcast. New York Now is a modern wholesale trade show experience for retailers and specialty buyers who are looking for a rich, diverse range of new products and exciting new brands. Located in the heart of New York City, where the latest in design and fashion emerge, New York Now is not just a trade show. It's a community driving style, success, discovery, innovation, and collaborations.
Hello, everyone. I'm Trish Borelli, Senior Attendee Marketing Manager at New York Now, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, How to Create Exceptional Product Photography from Your Mobile Phone and at Home. I'm happy to introduce you to professional photographer Tony Gale from New York City, where he has taught photography lighting at FIT and Parsons New School of Design, and is an educational ambassador for a myriad of corporate clients. Today, Tony will share with you his tips and tricks for do-it-yourself product photography. Hi, Tony. It's my pleasure to welcome you today.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. As was just said, I am a New York-based professional photographer. I'm also a Sony Artisan of Imagery, the president of APA, which is a photo trade organization, a man photo ambassador, and an X-Rite Colorati. I mention those because I may mention some of those brands, and I want to make sure that everybody knows that I have affiliations with those. I shoot for a variety of corporate advertising and editorial clients, mostly portraiture, but some still life and anything related. I do, as a professional photographer, want to mention that using photographers is also a good choice whenever you can afford it. There's going to be a lot more gear involved, a lot more experience, and there are things like this that can't really be done without that expertise. That said, the world we're in right now and the businesses many of us have, sometimes that's not an option. Or sometimes you need things in a hurry, or you don't have the budget. So being able to understand how to get the best picture possible with what you have available is the goal of today's session. A quick overview, I'm going to go over cameras a little bit, a lot more with phones, talk about lighting, talk about color, and talk about software. To start with, traditional cameras are typically going to give you better results than a phone. Phones are great now, but a good camera is going to do more, and it's going to offer you more flexibility. I'm showing a couple of ranges. This is the camera I use, the A7R4, removable lenses, huge resolution, nice big sensor. There's also things like this, the A5100 that's a lot smaller, a lot more portable, and a lot more affordable. And even things like the RX100, which is an all-in-one compact. All of those, because they're dedicated cameras, just out of the box, a dedicated camera is going to do a better job. But what phones can do now is incredible. Cell phone photography, there's people making a living just doing that. It's a great option. Everybody has a phone. This is the phone I use, the Xperia One. It's an Android-based phone. I'm showing you this because every cell phone is different. Even if you're using an Android phone, the app may be a little bit different depending on the version of the app. If you're using an iPhone, the version of iOS you're using is going to be different. So I'm going to go over things, and when you look at your phone, you may say that's not there. It probably is, just in a different way. All right, some basics. The most important thing, I think, above almost anything else, is keep the lens or lenses clean on your phone. The number of times I've been traveling somewhere and somebody sees me with my big camera on my shoulder and they say, hey, can you take a picture of us? And I pick up their phone and everything is hazy and sort of foggy, and it's because that lens isn't clean. Just keep it clean, wipe it down. If you have a nice microfiber cloth or anything lint-free, you want to be careful, obviously, not to use anything that could scratch the lens or that could add something to it. But that alone will make a huge difference. In my experience, almost everyone's phone could stand to have those lenses cleaned. Just wipe them clean with something soft and lint-free. Make sure it's not dirty. Make sure there's no sand on whatever you're wiping it down. But that will make a huge difference just right there. Another couple of things, you have touch to focus and you have exposure where you touch. So I don't know if you can see, there's a little circle in the middle of this screenshot. If I touch there, which I did, that's why the circle showed up, that's where the camera on the phone focuses. It's also where it sets exposure. So if things look bright or dark on whatever it is you want to photograph, you've got your product there, your nice, fancy, super cool, going to make you $1 million secret product that none of us know about yet. You pick up your phone and everything looks bright or dark and the phone isn't focusing in the right place. Just touch on the object and it should make it better. You can see here, I focused on the purple flower behind the one in the foreground and it changed the exposure. Everything got brighter because that flower was darker. If what you're focusing on is dark, everything gets brighter. If what you're focusing on is light, everything will get darker. On the left, you can see the third icon from the top is sort of looks like a sun, lit up a light blue. That's because I have selected it. What that will do is allow me to change color. On the right, there's two vertical lines. There's one for exposure and there's one for color. So if I swipe up with the color, everything gets warm. If I swipe down, everything gets cool. I'll get into color a little bit more in a bit, but that is one of the most important things. When you are photographing whatever product you're selling, if you put up a picture of it and somebody buys it down the line and they thought it was purple and it's really more of a magenta, you have an unhappy customer. So color is really, really critical. And it's something that's often sort of skipped or not given the priority it needs. So your phone is going to have a slider of some kind for color. So look at it and it doesn't look the same to your eye as it does on your phone. If it doesn't, you need to adjust the color. And then you have another slider for exposure. So you slide it up and down, it gets brighter or darker. Same kind of thing. If you're taking a picture of something and you've got a lot of light coming from behind, it's going to see all that light. It's going to make things dark. Like if you're outside and you're photographing somebody in front of the sun, they're very dark. Everything else behind is correctly exposed. You can correct for that to a point with that slider, just making it brighter or darker. And again, most phones have something like that that's really quick to get to. There's also a more advanced mode. And I know some of you are going to be thinking, I know all this. That's great. Hopefully we'll get into some more specific, more detailed stuff later that is more helpful to you. And if you don't know it, fantastic, now you do. Another key thing with photography, whether it's with a phone, a camera, anything else, a lot of people tend to photograph things from whatever angle and height that you are. So you're standing there, you raise your camera or your phone to your eyes or your face, that's the angle you shoot at from wherever you are. First of all, with products, I would say get closer. You don't want anything extraneous. You don't want things in that photo that don't tell the story of that product. You can build a whole nice set. If you sell pots and pans, you can put a pot on a stove and show the beautiful kitchen. But for the most part, someone looks at that and then they're not sure what you're selling. Is it the pot and the pan, or is it the stove, or is it the fridge, or is it the box of cereal next to the stove? So getting closer so that you're really focusing on what you're selling and what you're trying to photograph, and try different angles. There's no one right answer for that. Whatever you're selling is different than what the person next to you is selling, and the right angle for each of those products is different. So try different things. Another thing to try is if you're photographing a lot of things, you might want to put the phone or the camera on a tripod, something to hold onto it. If you're going to do that, you're going to want to use the self timer, because every time you touch your phone, it moves, or every time you touch your camera, it moves. And if you're photographing a lot of something, let's say you're selling washcloths and you need to photograph 50 washcloths and you want all the photos to look the same. The only way for that to happen is for everything involved to not move except for the washcloths as you move them in and out. So you're going to want to lock down that camera or that phone, and then you're going to want to use the self timer so it doesn't move as you're taking pictures. Self timer, there's usually a range of options: off, 3 seconds, 10 seconds, sometimes it's 5 and 10. There's different choices. 3 seconds is usually enough unless what you have the phone on is really wiggly, and then you might want to go with 10. Then you're going to have some advanced settings. And again, this is my phone, my Xperia 1. Your phone, unless it's the Xperia 1, is going to be a little bit different, even if it's another Android, but it should be similar. You can see the mode there on the bottom. If you click on mode, you bring up all these crazy options. If you click on manual, it gives you a lot more options. You can see you've got white balance, it's set to auto. Exposure value is set to ±0. Exposure value is the same as the slider we looked at before, where you move it up and down and it gets brighter or darker. You can control your ISO, which is the camera's sensitivity to light. You want that number as low as possible. while making sure that you're getting everything sharp. You can control your shutter speed. You can control all of that. The advantage of that is that if you set it in manual and you're doing what we talked about a moment ago, like with washcloths, where everything needs to be the same all the time, it allows you to make sure that no settings change. You set those settings and you leave them there. The exposure is the same, the color is the same, nothing changes. Sometimes if you put different colored things or different brighter or darker things in front of the phone or the camera, it will change the exposure, or it might change the color, so you might not have consistency from photo to photo. There's also these crazy settings that every phone has and every camera, almost every camera has. I only brought it up to say don't use them. Just leave it on normal. Don't use bright contrast or crazy saturation. Just let it be. And then also, don't use the flash on your phone. It's very direct. It's not very bright. It's not a flattering light. Make sure it's off. Some phones and some cameras will automatically turn that flash on if they think they need it. Turn it off. You're much better off to have it not firing. Now we're going to start getting into stuff that's a little more advanced, which is lighting. Photography is about lighting. While I said maybe the most important thing was making sure that that lens isn't dirty at the beginning, lighting is a very close second. Only second because if it's really, really dirty lens, your light can be amazing. It's still not going to be a good picture. But without good lighting, the picture doesn't work. So first is don't do this. This is on-camera flash sitting on my countertop. There's lots of stuff in the background. The flash, because it sees all that light underexposed, nothing about this picture is good. This is a Sony Mavic from the 90s. Takes floppy disks, if anybody remembers those. And it still works, but the resolution's pretty low. Your phone is about 100 times better than this camera. Don't just use the lights that are in your house or in your kitchen without changing anything, and don't just use the flash. If you take nothing else from today, that and clean your lens, you'll be happy. All right, so some things to try with lighting. This is straight daylight. The sun is just over my right shoulder. I'm not directly in front of it because if I was, you would see me casting a shadow. It's bright. It's natural looking, especially if it's late in the day. This was about 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. You don't want to do this in the middle of the day. You want the sun to be low. And for certain things, if you're photographing something with a lot of texture, low, hard light can really accentuate it. If you're photographing something dark with texture or with depth, sometimes low light going across can accentuate it. But if I was photographing something dark with that, you can see I'm sort of going in at the angle of the sun. Instead, I would get above it and shoot down so that you get the shadows and the highlights that help accentuate the depth and help accentuate the texture. Side light for texture. This is very straightforward.
I'm going to jump in because we do have a lot of people asking to that point about photographing jewelry, how to capture the light without getting that reflection that ruins the picture.
With something like jewelry or anything that is reflective and not flat, you will get reflections. It's impossible to avoid having any reflections without Photoshop. It can be done with Photoshop where you shoot and then you move the light and you shoot again. But we're assuming that's not the case. So in those instances, what you want to do instead of being upset that you have a reflection is control that reflection. With something like jewelry, the easiest thing to do is to get white cards or silver cards, but probably white. And what you can do is get that big white card and bring it in and allow that to be the reflection that your jewelry sees. Without reflection, jewelry looks dead. Metal looks dead. It just looks like nothing. So you can bring that card in, move it around, making sure that you are where the camera will be or that your camera is set up, and look from that angle and move that white card around, and you'll see those reflections change. It will allow you to make sure that the reflections you see are what you want and not the room. If you're really concerned about the phone or the camera being too reflective, what you can do is get a big white card, cut a little hole in it just big enough for the lens on your phone or your camera so that everything else is white card, and start with that. Even if it's, an 11 by 14 piece of card where you cut a little half-inch hole that you hold your phone up to, Then when you see that reflection in the jewelry, it just looks like a big, beautiful, bright thing with some transitions so that you'll see the facets of the jewelry. The metal will really shine. You don't want it to look flat. You don't want it to look specular. You want it to look glorious and like it has texture and dimension. So that's what I would do with that. The other thing to remember is that light moves in a straight line and bounces in a straight line. It's like if you're playing pool and you bounce a ball off the bumper, off the side of the pool table, whatever angle the ball hit, it goes off at the same angle in the other direction. Light behaves the same way. So if you are looking at something that is flat and reflective and you see the light, if you move the light, move it a little one direction and see how that reflection moves, and either keep moving it that direction until it's gone, or see that that reflection is getting worse and move it the other direction. Or if you can't move the thing in the light, move the camera. But the angle of incidence equals the angle of reflection. So the angle the light hits is the angle it will bounce off of. If the light is coming from the same angle as the camera and you're straight in, you're going to see it every time. But if you just move it off to one side or another, you should be able to reduce or eliminate it on a flat surface. Again, if it's a curved surface or something with facets like jewelry, because there's so many surfaces for that light to show up on, you're never going to be able to eliminate it. So then the goal is to control it and make it the reflection you want to see. So the challenge here, back to the straight daylight, is, you can see here's the setup. This is just a white piece of mat board with a dumbbell to hold it in place on the roof. Is now I'm standing in front of it. If I move too much, I'm blocking the light on the camera, on my product. That's no good. So instead, this is daylight from the side. So similar setup, white piece of mat board. The daylight's coming in from the right. It's low, it's dramatic, but the camera looks a little bit dark. The right side where it says 6X is a little bright. The front of it where all the stickers are is a little dark. So what I've done here is add a white card to the left to help fill it in. So you can actually see, because this is a little reflective, you can see how the card sort of made everything a little bit shinier. It looks more reflective. You can see it. It adds some texture, and it makes everything a little bit brighter. And a white card, that alone, nice light and a white card will make a big difference. However, if that's not enough, this is a silver card. This is just aluminum foil wrapped around a white piece of poster board. So now it's a lot brighter. It reflects a lot more, and it makes it look a lot more, looks more even, a little bit more dramatic maybe. And then with the white mat board, it just keeps things simple. That's my silver aluminum foil wrapped piece of board. And then now I'm just using the side opposite the sun. So the sun is, as you can see, is coming from right behind it. So it's all shade. It looks a lot more even. So there's a little hint of, there's that sun shadow. This is the reflective aluminum foil. Again, you can see there's highlights in the shadow. That's because the aluminum foil is not flat. So that might be too much. And you can do the same thing with white again, much more even. Of all of these, this is the most even neutral lighting we've looked at so far. It's less dramatic, but it shows the product. Everything is legible. You can see that the hand grip has depth because of the shadow. It helps tell the story of what the product is so people understand it.
A lot of people are also asking about a photography box. So what's the difference between using a card like this or a backdrop like this versus investing in a white photography box?
So I didn't bring up photography boxes because I was trying to show things that everybody can do without buying anything yet. A photography box can be useful. It's all white. It's translucent. So you put a light in, it's nice and soft. It's very consistent. It's not always that controllable. So with something like this, I can control it by moving the white card in and out, or by making it larger or smaller, or moving the angle or the foil. With a white photography box, because that box is typically a certain size, I think some of them you can remove sides, but it's the shape it is and the size it is. And while you can move the light that's outside the box around and control it that way, you can't really get in and finesse it to a huge amount. It is a really useful, quick thing, and for a lot of stuff, it's great, but it's not going to give you a ton of control.
Does it matter if a white fabric is used versus a mat board? Which do you think is better?
I prefer something rigid because fabric, you're more likely to see texture in the fabric and you're more likely to get wrinkles. If you can keep the fabric wrinkle free, so it's totally smooth and there's not enough texture in it to show up, then it's totally fine. It's just a lot harder to keep wrinkle free and to hang in a way that you don't see wrinkles. I think a lot of photographers and a lot of people have tried to use fabric in the beginning, and often I wish I hadn't. So that's why I went with this. This is also something that's easy to get, but you can try white fabric. If you can get it nice and smooth and even, absolutely. All right, so maybe you don't have a terrace or a rooftop. Some of you, I assume you're from all over the place, so some of you have yards. I'm jealous. I live in Brooklyn. We do not have yards, but we all have a window. So this is indirect window light. Indirect just means that the sun is not shining in that window, and that's important. You want to generally avoid direct light. You don't want the sun to come directly in. You can see it's nice and soft. It has direction because it's coming from the window. Make sure all the room lights are off, so the only light is coming from the window. And it will allow you to get nice soft light. I know plenty of professional photographers who, especially who shoot still life, who, if they can, will use window light 100% of the time. Sometimes it's a dark, stormy day and you can't, but it can be very beautiful light. So that white card and that foil, it can really give you a lot of flexibility and a lot of control. And then we have artificial lighting. It's great to have the sun. It's great to have daylight. It's beautiful light. But we don't always have the sun. We don't always have daylight. Maybe it's a dark day. Maybe it's winter. Maybe we've been shooting all day and we've got 20 more pictures to do and the sun's going down. And that's when you need to use artificial light. That artificial light can be anything. The light I'm using is an LED with a about 24-inch octabox on it. It's a little 8-sided diffusion box to help soften the light and control it. But you can use anything. The key is that you have to be able to move whatever that thing is. So you don't want to use the ceiling lights, the room lights, but you could use a table lamp with a shade if you needed to. Anything that you can move around, where you can move it in to make it brighter, out to make it darker, to the left or to the right, so that it's whatever creates the best light on your object, on your subject. Totally fine. There's a million things out there. You could use a flashlight. If it's a very small thing, you could use your phone. If you have the phone app that makes the face of it just turn all white as a flashlight, that can be a great light. You can use a TV, anything. Light is light, but you just want to be able to control it, move it, and make it brighter or darker. The lens being clean, super important. Light, super important. Color, as we touched on earlier, also super, super important. As a professional, I shoot my cameras in RAW. I use a gray card, and I will sometimes build a custom color profile so that the color is as exact as possible. I have a client that I shot a catalog for 4 or 5 years in a row that had a bunch of high-vis stuff where the color is really, really hard to reproduce. And using that custom profile is what made the color really consistent and accurate. You can do that too. If you're doing something quick at home with your phone, you may not have or need that level of control, but thinking about the color is important. So your phone or your camera is almost definitely starting on auto white balance. Auto white balance means that your camera or your phone is looking at the scene, using some behind the scenes calculating and saying, this is the color I think this is. And it's pretty good. It's usually pretty good. If you're outside, it will probably be right. If you're inside, it will probably be right. But when you're in close with something that might vary in color, it can guess wrong, especially if you're photographing a bunch of things in a row. If you're photographing t-shirts and you've got your white one and your black one and your green one and your purple one and your yellow one, that white balance could shift from picture to picture, and you don't want that. So you're going to want to go into white balance in your camera or in your phone. That is something you're probably going to find in the advanced settings. Because all lights have different colors, which we all know, especially with LEDs. Sometimes we buy those daylight balanced LEDs, and you put them in a room where there's the traditional incandescent LEDs and you see the color difference and it looks really weird. Whatever you want to do is fine, just make sure it's accurate to your scene. If you're using a camera, you can typically do a custom white balance, but in this particular instance with phones, it's probably going to be one of those settings, which is fine. Just pick the setting that is correct and make sure it's consistent. You want whatever it is that you're selling to be represented as well as possible. And so that color is really, really important. The right way is what works for you and what serves the purpose, but there's not only one right way. I would start with a tripod so that everything can be consistent. This is a Gorilla Pod, which is, it has a big camera on there, but this is what I would put that little phone clamp on. So it allows you to move it around. You're a lot better off buying something for $20 or $30 because your phone weighs half a pound less. And then for lighting, LEDs are what I would suggest at the moment. You could get hot lights. Strobes, if you're using your phone, don't make any sense really. And if you're buying LEDs, they've come a long way, but you want to be careful if you go too inexpensive because sometimes the color is inconsistent. So this is a Lycos. I have a couple of these. I really like them. And this is the light that I used. And then software. So you've taken your pictures. Everything's great, but you want it to be brighter or darker or cropped or more contrasty, or the color needs to change, or you need to retouch out some dust or anything, or you need to put all 12 washcloths on one piece of paper or on one image. There's a lot of options. So for mobile, I don't use all of these, but I know people who use all of them, which is why these are the ones I'm choosing to show. And most of the things available for mobile are free. VSCO has a ton of presets, has a lot of control. I know a lot of professional photographers who use this to edit stuff they put on Instagram. It gives you a lot of control, and it is available on Android and on Apple. All the apps I'm showing you for mobile are available on both. So VSCO is good. Snapseed, a lot of people really like Snapseed. I think the two are very similar. If you're not sure what to get, frankly, I would download them all and then see what feels right to you because it's so subjective. It's the same with any piece of software. VSCO might be great for you. Snapseed might be great for you. Adobe Lightroom, the desktop version of Adobe Lightroom is not free. The mobile version is. One of the advantages of the mobile version of Adobe Lightroom is if you are using a phone, you can use Lightroom to take the place of your phone's camera software, and it will allow you to shoot RAW in your phone using that sensor. RAW will allow you to correct color and exposure with a lot more latitude and a lot more control with less loss. Most of the time when you're doing a photograph, you're shooting in JPEG, and JPEGs you can mess with a little, but it's sort of baked in, and if you move it too much, the color or the exposure, the photo breaks down. With RAW, you've got a lot more room before that happens. If you really, really want to get into this, shooting RAW is the way to go. You don't have to start out, but it's where you would end up, I think, if you really, really, really wanted to do photography. And then Adobe also has a Photoshop Express version for mobile that will allow you to do different things. And it will let you go in and edit. I know people that will edit on an iPad with Lightroom and with Photoshop, and you can do a lot. Not quite as much as a desktop or a laptop computer, but you can do a lot. And all of those, again, are free. I think there's paid upgrades, but start out with free, see what works. If you're going to go to a computer, Photoshop is the one everybody uses. Even if you use another piece of software, almost everyone still uses Photoshop. That is not free. Capture One is a great piece of software. It lets you process files, adjust color, exposure, crop, do all sorts of stuff. Lightroom. And then if you get into the Skylum Luminar, it's probably easier to use, and it's definitely less expensive than the others. It does a lot automatically, and for some people, it is absolutely the right answer. The same with Affinity Photo. The two of those are sort of in a similar category. They're both less than $100 as opposed to the others that are much more than that. And it will allow you to do a lot. And if you're really like, I cannot spend money, the world's coming to an end, It's all I can do to take pictures. There is a piece of software called GIMP, which is new image manipulation program. It's been around for a long time. It's sort of a Photoshop substitute that is free. I haven't loved it when I've tried it, but some people swear by it. Some people absolutely love it, and it will help you a lot, and certainly the price is right. So I went through a lot quickly, so we'll see what questions people have now.
Do you have any special tips for highlighting clothing in photography?
I mean, there's sort of two different ways that people shoot clothing. There's lay flats, where you just lay it out flat and shoot down, or at a little bit of an angle, or putting it on a model or a form. If it's something that really needs to be seen as to how it hangs, I would put it on a model for sure. I think a model makes a lot of sense for that. If it's a t-shirt, unless it's a t-shirt with some crazy cut, I think just laying it flat is fine. You're going to want to see the texture of the fabric, so you're going to want some light coming from the side. You don't want it all coming from the front. So a little bit of dimension so that there's a highlight side and a shadow side, so you can see what kind of fabric it is. If it's something with a lot of buttons and zippers and details, you're going to want to see that. And that's all accentuated with light coming a little bit from the side. And if it's a dark fabric, you want to make sure you're giving it enough light, but not too much light. You don't want it to feel brighter than it is. Large objects like furniture, depending on the size of the furniture, I mean, it's a similar thing. You want to see the dimension, you want to see the detail. The challenge with that is finding a place that is clean enough to shoot in. If you've got a showroom or something like that that's nice enough that it can feel like that couch is in a place that a couch is supposed to be, then that can be great. Otherwise, what you might consider doing is cutting it out in Photoshop, or having somebody else cut it out in Photoshop so that you can put it on white. Or you can buy 9-foot white seamless or 11-foot white seamless and hang that up and put furniture on that.
Great. And then what about photographing white on white?
If you're exposed correctly, and that's not always easy if you're in auto, white on white should be okay because there is texture and there's detail. The biggest issue with photographing white on white is if you overexpose at all, everything is just white and you lose it. You could also consider, if what you're photographing is a true white, maybe your white background is a little bit of a warm white or a little bit of a cool white. So it's not exactly the same white. But white on white shouldn't be as hard as people think. It's mostly just an exposure thing and a lighting thing. You're going to want to make sure that your highlights aren't too bright. If they are, just move your light back so as it's further away, it will even out a little.
Okay, and how about muted colors? So we have someone who hand dyes silk scarves using a plant-based material, and they have trouble capturing the colors and the contrast on their phone.
For that, if you're really having trouble with color, the first thing I would try and do is download the Adobe Lightroom free app and shoot it in RAW so that you have more control and you can correct for some of that. Every camera, every phone, every image sensor, and everything that interprets it looks at color in its own way. And if you let it all do that automatically, you have limited control. If you shoot it in RAW, you can bring some of that control back. So it could be that your phone does that, or it could be that every phone would do that. But if you I would try doing the Lightroom and switching it to DNG, which is digital negative, which is RAW. And then you can bring back some saturation, you can bring back some color in the software, both when you're photographing it and in post.
Great. And then we have a few questions that relate to equipment. One being, if you were to invest in a reasonably priced camera versus using your phone, what would you recommend?
I'm going to recommend some things, but keep in mind that reasonably priced means different things to different people. The camera that Sony sells the most of, I think, is the A6000, which is around $500 with a lens. It's about 6 years old, so it's an older camera, but it's a really good price point, and it's a very, very decent camera. We just got one from my girlfriend's dad for his birthday. That's a good sort of middle-of-the-road camera. It depends on if $500 is what you think of as reasonable. If that still seems too high, then I would look at a used camera. I would look for something used. If you have more, Then you can start thinking about if full frame or APS-C is more important. Full frame is a larger sensor. It lets in more lights. It allows you to control depth of field more. And if you are really, really planning on doing a ton of still life stuff, especially small still life stuff, I would try and go for full frame because it enhances detail. Then you can get something like the A7 II is, I think, around $1,000 now. And then you can just sort of go up from there. But it's a difficult question to ask without knowing what reasonable is.
We'll go with that. No, that's a great answer. So what else do we have here? Lenses. So if you have an iPhone or if you're using a smartphone to take your pictures, do you recommend any add-on lenses for close-ups?
There are a lot out there. A lot of them aren't very good. And so that's what you want to be careful of. The ones that are good aren't cheap. And at that point, you know, it starts to be, is it worth it to use it for your phone or to just get a camera and a different lens? I've heard of things that people like. I think there's a company called Moment, I think, that makes lenses that people like. But most of them degrade the image quality so much that I don't think it's worth it. I think it would be better to just shoot and crop later.
And another one that came in, how do we photograph three-dimensional art on canvas?
Three-dimensional art on canvas. So it's a piece of canvas that has texture. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm assuming that question means. Similar to some of the stuff we talked about with fabric, what you want to see is that there's dimension to it. And the biggest thing with that is the lighting. So you want the light to come more from the side than from the front. And you will see that there's shadows and highlights, and it will help tell the story of the dimension and the depth.
And I know we talked a little bit about light boxes. Some people who have light boxes are having trouble adjusting the lighting. Do you have any tips for that?
That's why they're challenging. I'm assuming that they're white boxes where the lighting can be moved. If that's the case, what I would do is try moving the light further away or closer. You could also, if you really want to get crazy, do things like get aluminum foil and wrap some of it around the light so that you focus it. If you focus the light, that external light that's shining into your light box, so instead of lighting the whole thing, it's just hitting a piece of it, it will change the character of the light inside. And it's a really simple thing to try.
And this might just depend on the phone, but do you know of any voice controls that you can use versus setting a physical timer?
One thing I neglected to mention is that a lot of phones, if they have a wired headset, sometimes you can use the down volume button on your wired headset to trigger the camera. So if you have the camera app open and you just hit the volume down on your headset, the camera will fire. You could try that. It's not wireless, but it is simpler than using the timer.
That's a good tip. And can you explain for those of us who don't know, what is white balance?
So white balance is the overall color of the image. It's the camera's interpretation of what the tone of neutral is. So auto white balance is the camera looking at the exposure and looking at the scene and saying, I think that this is daylight, and I think Kelvin temperature is 5,500 degrees Kelvin, which is a version of how warm it is. 3,200 degrees Kelvin is incandescent, 5,500 is daylight, about 10,000 is a cloudy day. So that white balance is the camera deciding where on that spectrum it is to get to neutral, and that's why you might want to control it. There's also, if you really want to get into the weeds, there's a green magenta shift, but usually that's not a factor anymore. It's a big factor with fluorescent lights. But that's what white balance is. It's the color of the image, and you want to control that.
Okay, great. So this person's asking about angles. For example, say you're shooting a vase. What is your opinion on shooting from either a dead level versus slightly lower than sight line or slightly downwards? Does it change the attitude of the photo? Does it change the mood?
It can. It depends on what it is. A lower angle is more heroic. So depending on what it is, you might want that, this is super cool and awesome, and this deodorant is the best thing ever. Look at how mighty it is. A lower angle might do that. Some of it depends on what it is. If it's a thing in a box, you might want to be up and at a 3/4 so that you see the front, the top, and the one side, which you're going to lose at a lower angle. It's also, you got to be careful if you get too low because whatever the object is on, you don't want that to be too much of the foreground. But it can change the difference. It can make a difference. And the answer to what you should do is it depends. That's why earlier at the beginning I mentioned trying different angles. If one of them works for you, then it's the right answer.
Okay, makes sense. Is a ring flash around the SLR lens a good option for lighting?
So a ring flash is a light that is circular, like a ring, and the lens of the camera goes right in the middle of it so that there's light coming from all sides of the lens. Is it a good option for lighting? The short answer is most of the time no, in my opinion. That said, some people love it. What it's really designed for originally was for macro photography, like if you were photographing bugs or something, and you couldn't really have too many shadows because of the angles. And then there's bigger ones that are used for more things. The challenge with using a ring light is usually you do want some shadow and some texture. And it sort of eliminates that because all the light is coming from where the lens is. So the shadows that are there fall behind the object and you don't see them. And often that's not the best way to represent what you're photographing. That said, some people love it and sometimes it's great.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you're a retailer and the only place you can photograph is from your store. The question is, as a good amount of pictures I send to clients are from within the store's incandescent lights, fine jewelry, and not always the best. Can we talk about how to improve that?
So, assuming that you can't turn off the lights in the room, we'll assume that. What you could try and do is bring in another light that would overpower those. Assuming you can't do that, what you might consider doing is getting something translucent. So there's a lot of stuff, like there's Elastilite Halo. There's a lot of products that are made for it, but you could also just try it with wax paper or something to start. And if you put that over the jewelry so that the incandescent light's coming down from the ceiling, hit that, get softened and spread out, it will probably look nicer. That will probably help. We'll make it look less direct, less specular, and just softer and nicer.
Great. And then just some basic questions. Some people don't know how to find these settings on their phone.
On an Android phone, if you open the camera app, there's a button that says mode, and it's that. On an iPhone, it should be something similar, but I don't have one in front of me, so it's hard for me to say. I will say what I would try doing if you just can't find it and you're not sure is just go to YouTube, whatever your phone is, say camera, this phone, and somebody has made a YouTube video about it. Hopefully they'll at least address that phone specifically. I really can't because everyone is different. Even different Android phones are different.
This is true. And then what about editing? A little bit of advice in terms of, should you do a lot of editing? Should you not, keep it simple and not over edit a photo? And then maybe talk a little bit about pixelation in terms of manipulating the photo after to ensure that the quality is maintained.
Okay, so there's a couple answers there. First, with how much editing you should do, that is very subjective. I like to do as little as possible. I'd like to do everything I can while actually capturing the photo, so in camera, to make it as close to ideal as possible so that later I need to do as little as possible. That said, there are people who do huge amounts of editing, and neither of those is the right or wrong answer. It's very much subjective. I would say if you're starting out, the closer to in-camera you can get it right, the better. And then from there, you can start deciding that there are things that you just want to edit and do in retouching later. And then in terms of the quality loss with editing, that's where if you're doing a lot of editing, using something like the Lightroom app or another app that will let you shoot in RAW will make a big difference. The RAW is essentially all the information to make the picture, but it's not made into a picture yet. It's done in software. Whereas if you shoot in JPEG, it's done by the camera or by the phone or by the camera, and that's what it is. And while you can mess with it, you're messing with something that's baked in. Whereas with RAW, the recipe is there, but it isn't cooked yet. So you can add some more sugar or add more salt or more food coloring or more flour or whatever you need to make it right, instead of taking that soup that's already cooked and thinking, wow, this is too salty. I'll drop some potatoes in and hope they absorb the salt. That was a lot of analogies sort of scrambled together.
Okay, so in terms of resizing for social media or for web, do you have any tips that would be helpful?
It depends on the social media. Facebook, Instagram, everything has its own ideal size. I usually do 2,000 pixels on the side for Instagram. Generally, bigger is better because people have such big screens now. The problem is if you go too big, it takes too long to load. But a 4K screen is 3,840 pixels on the long side and 2,160 on the short side. So someone might potentially look at your object or your product full screen on a 4K monitor. You want it to look as good as possible. And I've seen a lot of photographers' websites that were clearly designed before that was the case. And when you look at them full screen on a new monitor, everything looks a little pixelated, and that's not great. So that's what I would keep in mind. If it's possible to look at that picture full screen, I would make it 3,840 pixels on the long side.
Great. And if we are editing, we should probably point out that to keep those proportions locked and not stretch those photos.
Yes, crop, don't just stretch it.
Right. Great. Do you recommend using a tablet? Can you use a tablet for photography?
I know people that do. I don't know if they mean for editing or for photography. I know people that do both. I have a friend who uses a tablet a lot for photography and really likes it. To me, there's still a little limiting. The horsepower of the processor in there just isn't the same as my computer. So to me, that's a limiter, but you absolutely can.
Great. One of the other popular questions is removing the background of an image.
I'm going to give you the simplest answer and the less simple answer. The less simple answer is in Photoshop, which then you would have to buy. There's a tool that will allow you to select your image, your object, and it will do a good job, like 95% of the time, at clipping it out and removing that background. If it's something that's pretty straightforward, if it's something that's like a portrait where somebody's hair is flowing in the wind, it doesn't do a great job, although it does a better job than it used to. But if it's a box where all the edges are sharp, it'll do a good job. But to do that, you have to buy Photoshop. The other answer is, frankly, there's a bunch of overseas retouchers that will do cutouts like that, sometimes for $1.50 or $2 an image. And, if you have 1,000 images, maybe that's out of your budget. But if you have 5, it's probably easier to just do that.
Okay. And then the last question we'll take today is with regards to tripods. You had recommended a tripod for a physical camera, but I do believe there are tripods that you can purchase designed for your iPhone, correct?
Yes. So I'll just go back up. So for an iPhone, what I like is a Gorilla Pod with a clamp for your phone, and there's kits that put them together. I like that because it's a little bit bigger than a little tiny tripod. But yeah, there's tons of things that are specific to your phone.
Okay, that's great. We had a lot of great questions. I want to thank you, Tony, for your time today. There's a lot of great information. If you would like to reach out to him, tonygale.com is his website. You can also follow him on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. So please do that and reach out.
Good luck. I hope everybody's staying healthy and well.
Thanks so much. Thank you for joining us. Please do reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you for listening to the New York Now podcast. Make sure to tune in weekly for engaging and insightful conversations touching on the most relevant topics facing our community today. Visit NewYorkNow.com to learn more about our market and how you can join in on the conversation.